Hello, we are Coping Life Talk, and we are together for over 2 years. Today, our guest is from California, and we welcome you, Katie. So wonderful to talk today on this important topic of how to stop using alcohol as a coping tool. And as we all know, COVID did not help with that issue. And also, can you guess how many people in America die from any related issues with to alcohol every year? Anybody? 3.3 million
Oh
Wow.
my goodness.
a year. And that's a scary number. That's why, Katie, we are so excited that you're here with us. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm so honored to be here to share this with you because I think this is such a pressing issue that a lot of people suffer with, and they suffer in silence with problem drinking. I myself am someone who was experiencing an alcohol use disorder for nearly a decade, and it was something I really suffered with in secret. Wasn't really sure if I was an alcoholic and really felt that label was something that I didn't want to put on myself. I was still functioning in life, but definitely using alcohol every night as a coping tool, drinking a bottle or wine or two every single night. And so I kept searching for answers, trying to get out of that habit I was stuck in. And I would try to quit drinking literally dozens of times because the logical part of my brain was telling me, you need to stop, you have a problem. But I just couldn't stay stopped. I would keep relapsing, whether it was a couple of weeks, couple of months. I made it 6 months one time, but I kept relapsing. And I now understand why that is, which I'm hoping to share more with you all today. But what I found, especially since COVID has hit, drinking, of course, was on the rise. People were able to get alcohol delivered. And what I'm finding is that there's a lot of people out there who are successful, wonderful, loving people, their parents, their entrepreneurs, their teachers, their therapists, who are stuck in this ritual of especially nightly drinking or almost nightly drinking, and they can't really get out of that habit. And so I want to share today about really a revolutionary way to overcome problem drinking that unfortunately most people don't know about, but it's something that is amazingly effective and helpful for people who are struggling with this, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe.
Thank you, Katie, so much. And before we have a question from Candy, I want to introduce, every time I introduce our co-hosts, Candy Sheehan and or Scott Kiddle. So welcome, everybody. And I hope that today we will learn something about this extraordinary approach. And I just know that, Katie, you will make it so convincing and also easy to understand, because it's one of the issues. Also, people hear lots of ideas, but then it's like, is it practical, is it expensive? So we will hear more about this. Stay with us. So Candy,
What I wanted to understand in the beginning, before we got too far, do you think, Katie, there's a difference between problem drinking and being an alcoholic? Is it all one and the same? Like if you use alcohol every night to cope, but you say, well, I'm not an alcoholic, I could quit if I wanted to. But is it all the same thing? Is there a difference between problem drinking and being an alcoholic?
I love that question, Candy, because I don't think there is a difference. I think the challenge with the term alcoholic is kind of twofold. That there's a lot of stigma associated with it. So a lot of people, myself included, even though we're drinking way more than what we should be and it's chronic, calling ourselves an alcoholic is a really hard label to put on ourselves. And so for some people, it does help them. But what I find for a lot of people, they're just not quite ready to put that label on themselves. And also the term alcoholic, what does that really mean? And a lot of people, like I said, even if they're drinking a lot, they're like, well, I'm just a heavy drinker. I'm not an alcoholic. So the term that we use more nowadays is alcohol use disorder. It exists on a spectrum. So people have mild, moderate, or severe. But it is, to answer your question, it all is, kind of one and the same. And some people find that label and identity helpful, while others don't, or they even use it as an excuse. I've seen where they're like, I'm an alcoholic, that's just who I am, so I'm going to keep perpetuating this unhealthy behavior.
I want to ask you a question about this term, AUD, alcohol use disorder. So how different it is from alcoholic or alcoholism?
It's the same thing. It's just a different terminology that more accurately, especially in the medical world, if people are, seeing an addiction specialist who is really well versed in these effective treatments, it's a more or a less stigmatizing term, I should say, and it's more accurate. Kind of like I was saying, someone can have mild alcohol use disorder, moderate, or severe, and so for people to be diagnosed along that spectrum, as opposed to just you're an alcoholic, it's like, well, what does that even mean? So it's more of a spectrum, but it is all kind of like the same thing. It's just about using language that is more accurate to what someone is going through, and doesn't come with such a heavy stigma associated with it.
Okay. Yeah. So Scott had a question.
Yeah.
Not yet.
No, not yet, but I'm sure I will.
Okay, so let's go by your subtitles, because subtopics that you had today were, first of all, how to stop using alcohol as a coping tool. So are you saying that when people drink, they drink because they try to cope with certain issues?
Yeah, that's what I find a lot. So what typically happens with people when they start on the road of developing an alcohol use disorder is maybe they have a traumatic event happen in their life, a death or a divorce or something, and they lean on alcohol to cope. And so what happens for people is maybe they start drinking as a coping tool for something like that, but over time almost anyone can develop an addiction to it. And so maybe they started drinking during their divorce, but before they know it, 5 or 10 years have gone by, and here they are still drinking a bottle of wine every night or more, even though their divorce is well behind them. But I also do find, because it's such a readily available legal substance that you are welcome to drink anywhere, really. A lot of people just do kind of default to that as a tool to unwind at the end of the work day. If they're stressed with their kids and they put their kids to bed, they reward themselves with wine, or if their work is overwhelming them, they'll use alcohol as a coping tool. So I find that is like the prominent reason that people do drink. There's kind of two categories that people drink for: relief, which is coping, or reward, which is kind of a celebratory thing. And I find people tend to drink for both reasons, but oftentimes it is to cope. And it's just a very effective, albeit temporary and, not helpful coping tool that a lot of people they've fallen into the trap, and then their brain becomes addicted and they're not sure how to get out of it.
And so, like you said, that the coping tool, using alcohol as a coping tool, is a learned behavior. So it doesn't happen overnight, correct? That we become this AUD people who suffer from alcohol use disorder. That's what AUD stands for. But so it's a learned behavior that is it rewarding, you said? Rewarding by how? By producing something in our brain, correct? So could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So, yes, when we drink alcohol, it's extremely rewarding for our brain. It produces a flood of feel good hormones like endorphins. And so, the way our brains are built, they're wired to remember things that give us pleasure. And you can think about it with food or restaurants or people or places or things or anything that you enjoy. It's like you're going to want to do that again. And so, when we drink, it produces just an enormous amount. It's actually twice the amount of pleasure you would experience, like if you had your best day ever and you won the lottery and you have your dream job and your dream partner and everything's just fantastic. The amount of pleasure your brain gets on that day is still half the pleasure that you get when you drink alcohol. So it's just this unnatural amount of endorphins. And so that's why almost anyone with enough repeated drinking can develop an alcohol use disorder, because the brain adapts to getting that huge reward, and it adjusts its set point for what it deems as pleasurable. And so what happens is your brain gets used to that, and it starts to think, okay, that's a reward that I need. Essentially, it starts to equate it to a survival need. Like I need that hit from alcohol. And so that's where the addiction really sets in. And at that point, when someone tries to quit drinking, what often happens is, and it happened for me, I see it happen with clients and people all the time, is that they get into craving mode because their brain is used to that pleasure. And so as soon as it's taken away, it's like, where's that pleasure? I need that pleasure. And again, it's equating it mistakenly to a survival need. And so that's often the thing that leads to people to relapsing over and over again, is that their brain is just desiring this substance. And so oftentimes they'll just end up drinking. And it's not a logical process either. Like it's a very primitive part of our brain that is hijacked by alcohol. So the logical side can be saying, I need to drink, or I need to not drink. Why am I doing this? I'm destroying my life, my health, my family. But then the primitive part that is really addicted kind of overrides that, again, thinking we need this alcohol to survive.
So that's why you say when it's learned, it's very hard for people to break the link and unlearn it, because typically it's already has set it, right? So that's what when you say that even when we set up resolutions every year, and or we feel like our family is in danger, that maybe I'm facing a divorce, but still it's just so set in this our disorder that we cannot stop it.
Yep, that's exactly right. No matter how much our logical, side of our brain wants to, it's just that urge. I give the example sometimes, it's not a perfect example, but it's something similar that's happening. Like logically today, each of you could say, I'm going to quit drinking water. I'm never going to drink water again. But by tonight or tomorrow, you'd be thinking about water and thinking, man, I need a drink. I'm thirsty. I really need some water. And the longer you go without drinking it, the more you're going to think about it. And so it's a similar type of survival need that we're thinking alcohol is giving us. And so when people quit, there's actually research on it. It's called the alcohol deprivation effect. And so when they quit, they, again, like logically, they think this, I'm going to quit, I'm going to do it. But then that primitive kind of urge and craving starts to creep in, and they start to obsessively think about it until they can finally give in to that urge.
It's very interesting. And before we continue with your method, what I wanted to talk about is that when, for example, it was an interesting experiment that is called Don't Think About the Yellow Monkey. So what you're talking exactly, essentially, is when we try to tell ourselves, and that's what the experiment was, the students were told, do not think about yellow monkey, do not think. And student says, whatever we tried, all we could think of was yellow monkey we never seen in our entire life. And so same with water, same with alcohol. Okay, so let's continue then. So then what is that method that you actually experimented on yourself?
Yeah.
And how did you learn about it? What is the name and why does it work?
Yes. Okay. So the name of it is called the Sinclair method, or the more like medical term is pharmacological extinction. And it was discovered over 30 years ago in Finland by Dr. David Sinclair. That's how it got its name, the Sinclair method. And how it works essentially is that a person actually continues to drink on this method, which is pretty counterintuitive. I know if someone has a problem with alcohol, oftentimes it's like they need to stop drinking. And while that is, true and the best option for some people, for others like myself and a lot of people I've met over the years, like quitting drinking is very difficult to do. And in fact, I was just at an addiction conference and they had someone speaking. And the first thing he said was, we all know treatment doesn't work. And there's a statistic that people have to relapse 7 times before they finally quit drinking. I relapsed many more times than that, but it's just kind of well known in the treatment industry that quitting alcohol isn't as easy as it seems like it should be. So that's where this method comes in. It allows a person to continue to drink, but what they start doing is they're taking a medication beforehand that's called naltrexone. It's an opiate blocker medication, not to be confused with an opiate, but it's an opiate blocker, and it's a generic pill. It's very affordable in most part of the world because there's no pharmaceutical company behind it. It's generic. Some countries it's even over the counter actually. But they take this pill before they drink, an hour or two before they drink. And what it's doing is it's blocking. Remember, I said we get that huge flood of endorphins in our brain when we drink, but it's going to be blocking those. And so it doesn't make you sick. It doesn't make it like an unpleasant experience. But over time, what it does is it just makes it a little less pleasurable. So each time someone is drinking on this medication, their brain is essentially breaking the link between alcohol equals reward because they're not getting that same endorphin reward. It's being blocked. And so what happens for a lot of people, this is a longer term treatment protocol, but it's kind of like weight loss where, if you're trying to lose weight, maybe you'll lose a pound or 2 a week and you'll see little changes in progress along the way. It's the same thing with this protocol where, I'll just use me as an example. I was easily drinking a bottle or 2 of wine 7 days a week, every single night. And I would force myself to have alcohol-free days. I was thinking about drinking starting at 11 a.m. every day, kind of fantasizing about my nightly wine ritual. Really, hanging out with people that drank. I didn't really want to do things unless alcohol was there. That was where I started the method. But as I got going on the method, one of the first things I noticed was that it would be 2 or 3 in the afternoon and I'd be like, I didn't think about drinking today, or like I didn't think about it till 2 or 3 today as opposed to, 11 a.m. Or I was able to have alcohol-free days more regularly where they weren't forced or white knuckled, but I was like, I just genuinely don't feel like drinking today. And then when I was drinking, I could no longer finish a bottle of wine. I could only have 2 2 or 3 glasses. And so it was like this progress over time where I just unlearn the pattern of over drinking and problem drinking to the point where at the end I was drinking 1 glass of wine once a month, like if I was out to dinner with my husband or something. But then at that point, what happened is I often tell people I quit drinking by accident because a month went by and then 2 and then 3 and 4. And I just was so uninterested in alcohol that it no longer occurred to me to drink anymore. And that was over 4 years ago because my brain has been restored. Because when you repeatedly drink on this medication, it really takes down the pathways that have been driving problem drinking and allows you to develop over time like new hobbies and habits and coping tools and things like that. So people can get to a place where it feels like the addiction has kind of been erased from the brain and they feel really recovered. I don't take the medication anymore because I'm not drinking anymore and don't have cravings. People could be drinking all around me and I genuinely don't want to. So it's not an instant fix, we often tell people, but it can be a permanent one where the brain and the root cause of problem drinking is really healed.
So how long does it take for this method to work?
So oftentimes people get started and they'll see some immediate changes. Like in the first 30 days, a lot of people will see a pretty, significant reduction in their drinking. Some people don't, it's not the same for everyone. I found everyone responds at different rates, but almost everyone will see at least a little bit of a difference. Like they're thinking about alcohol less or they're drinking a little less within the first 30 days. But then from there, there's going to be some ups and downs because like with any behavior change, it's going to take time. So on average, we typically tell people to give this a year just so they have a realistic mindset of how long it can take. Because sometimes people come into this thinking, oh, it's a pill and it's going to fix everything in, a week or two. But oftentimes we've developed problem drinking over the course of years or decades. And so it's going to take time to undo that behavior and figure out new ways to spend your time and new ways to cope. But for most people, like they'll see significant progress each month they're on the method. The longer you're doing it, the better it works. For me, I reached what's known as extinction. It took me about 9 months, but I was hardly drinking at all for the last half of doing this method. I was drinking well within the recommended guidelines. I was no longer getting drunk or experiencing hangovers. I would have 1 or 2 drinks here and there. But yeah, we typically say it takes a year, but the whole time people are seeing progress and, through that process as well, they're able to typically, take small steps to develop new hobbies and habits and things that they enjoy and healthier coping tools, especially because if you keep turning to alcohol as a coping tool, and you're not getting that same euphoria or the same reward because it's being blocked, you can still get drunk, you can still over drink. But what happens is people start to realize like it's not scratching the itch anymore. It's not doing it for me like it used to. And so it becomes much easier then to try out and consider different coping tools or, get therapy or deepen your spiritual practice or, exercise or, the million things we can do to cope that are healthier coping tools. It just makes it much easier to do because you're not fighting the craving anymore, but rather you're just creating new habits instead and in place of drinking.
Sorry. I wondered if someone was listening to us today and they wanted this prescription. Is it something that's widely used and well known? And would it be something they could get a prescription very easily? Or how would that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Candy, because honestly, I started this method in 2017, and back then it was a lot more difficult to get the prescription, but it's become much easier to do. So this medication has been FDA approved for treatment of alcohol addiction since 1994. So if someone goes to their general practitioner and asks for a prescription, they will be able to see that it's approved for treatment of alcohol use disorder. But sometimes what happens is, your general practitioner oftentimes has very little to no training in addiction. And so sometimes they will not prescribe it simply because they just don't know about it and don't know enough about addiction to work with a patient on that. Other times and other doctors, they will prescribe it. So it's really hit and miss. The challenge is that often it will be prescribed to take with abstinence, and it has been shown to help people with cravings if they're taking it with abstinence. But the Sinclair method, meaning the protocol where you're drinking on the medication, that's where the extinction can really come in, and people can have their brain restored essentially. And so that's why we specialize in that method, because it's been, I have my personal experience with it, and it's been just the most well researched and used method. But people can also, what's been great about COVID and stuff is there's a lot more telehealth providers now. So there's doctors, in the US in all 50 states that specialize in this, where people can meet with them through video and have a consult. And if the doctor thinks it's a right choice for them, they'll prescribe the medication. So it is easier and easier to get. And we have a program where we guide people through it. And if someone doesn't have it, we will offer like a concierge service to get them the prescription. But in all of the US, there's certainly providers, and in different countries, it's like in Spain, it's over the counter. You can just go buy it. In Australia, it's more difficult to get. In Canada, it's pretty easy to get. So it varies country to country, but it's accessible pretty much worldwide.
The question I have is why then, if this medicine is known since 1994 and approved, then is it because it contradicts all this rehab philosophy that make tons of money on their patients? And we know that it's not a cheap thing, but also that relapses.
Yeah.
People go back into drinking at least 7 times. I mean, some of them more. Some people go through rehab 20 times until it hits, they hit the bottom, or maybe something changes in their brains. So why then doctors, if they are aware of this method, do not prescribe it? Is it because also partially it's kind of secrecy, it's all under the surface, and even people who go to the doctor for various reasons, they never admit they have AUD or alcoholism problem? So why is it? There are so many questions that come to this.
Yeah, I know. And honestly, that's a question I've asked myself a million times, and I get people asking it as well, because what I find is when people start on it, they're like, why didn't I know about this before? Like, or I've talked to my doctor about my drinking before. I went to rehab 3 or 4 times and no one ever told me about this. Like, why? And I was actually at a conference a couple weeks ago and did ask this pretty renowned addiction specialist who's actually known that this medication has worked for alcohol since the 80s. So even before it was approved by the FDA. And I asked him that question, and his belief, and I've heard this before from other addiction specialists, is that, what he said was like, we just really believe that abstinence is the best way to go. And so we don't want to get people on a medication that promotes them to drink. But the issue with abstinence is it's not, you might be sober on the outside, but your brain is still hijacked to crave alcohol. And so, yes, like we all know abstinence would be better, or like, if people just never ate sugar again, that would be better. But like, what's realistic for people? And so I think that's been the challenge, like, just like you said, the rehab and AA is like the system that's been around for almost 100 years, and it's strictly abstinence based. So it's hard to change that belief system and paradigm that's been in place. And also, a lot of doctors aren't aware of it. Like typically if someone expresses this concern to their doctor that they're drinking too much, the doctor will just tell them, oh, cut back or go to rehab or go to AA. They don't know that there's this amazingly effective medication that can help people, whether it's mild, moderate, or severe alcohol use disorder, can help them to cut back. And I will say, like, I'm someone who I ended up going abstinence through this approach. And what I find for a lot of people, and it was true for me, is that they get started on this medication and they have no desire to quit drinking because, again, we're still addicted. We still really want the substance. And I'm like, that's fine. But a lot of people, when they start, just as their brain gets healed, within a year or two, they're basically sober anyway, or they're basically hardly drinking at all, or maybe they are completely alcohol free. But it's them kind of getting to that place as opposed to someone saying, you need to stop drinking. It's them kind of allowing their brain to heal and getting to a place where actually, like, I don't really like to drink anymore at all. And so that's part of like, I'm so glad we're talking today. And part of like what I'm on fire for is just to like raise awareness and make this treatment be another option, not to say get rid of AA, because, I know people sober through AA. I'm glad that program exists, but just for these other options that, for the people AA doesn't work for, or for the people who maybe they're more mild AUD and they want to cut back, but they know they're not an alcoholic and they don't need to go away to rehab. So it's amazing too, because it can help people on the spectrum. Like I have clients who have, they're drinking only 2 or 3 glasses of wine a night. Maybe that's not that bad, but they know it's problematic because if they go a night without it, they're missing it, they're thinking about it. And so they just want to dial that back a little bit. And so it allows people to address it sooner so that it doesn't escalate to a place of, complete, what we might imagine as an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I need to ask again because I did not get it right written down. What is the name of this medicine? Just so I'll be able to tell someone should they ask me.
Yeah, it's naltrexone, Trexone. And that's
Okay,
the
thank you.
generic form of it.
Thank
It
you.
typically comes in a 50 milligram tablet, and it's
Okay,
very affordable. US, it can be covered by insurance, it can be free, and if you don't have insurance, it can be 20 or $30 for a month's supply.
that's very helpful. I think people will want to know that. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Katie, I have a loved one who has struggled with addiction for many years,
Yeah.
and has been in court-ordered rehab, and has also chosen to go into rehab. And so, because of that, I went with this person to some of the AA meetings many years ago, and I came away thinking, this is a dismal environment. I mean, these poor souls really have a desire to get sober. Some are forced to get sober by the court, and it seems like they just struggle through this process of trying to be sober a minute at a time, an hour at a time, a day at a time. And the program, as most people know, is the 12 steps, and they're all wonderful approaches to reordering your life, right? But it seemed to me like the approach was more about changing your mental programming more than changing your neurochemistry.
Yeah.
So the mental programming, although I'm a big believer in changing how we think, right? Reprogramming our computer, and that's very important. But for so many, it seems that there's a need to break that link in the neurochemistry that becomes very defeating.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I agree. Like, some people are diehard AA people, and I think that's fantastic. Like, for me, it's just whatever approach will work for you, but there are a lot of people who have been through AA, even spent decades in AA, who have come to the Sinclair method because they kept relapsing, or the dogmatic belief system of AA, like, for example, if you're 12 years sober and you have a relapse, you're basically back to square one. And I think it really depends on the group you plug into as well, because I know there's some groups that are very healthy and helpful, and people love it, but then I've heard there's more like toxic AA groups. So it really does depend on the group. But one time I heard a therapist kind of equate it to, I told you about the example of the water. Like, if you're really thirsty, like, try doing therapy when you're dying of thirst. It's like, how much are you really going to resolve or come to or realize when, like, all you're thinking about is, I need to get some water. And so, similar thing when we're drinking, like, people do say one day at a time. Like, I've heard people say, I'm 3 years sober and I still think about drinking every day. And like, I commend those people for staying sober if they're still thinking about it, because for me, it was like, I would always just give in to that urge eventually, because it would just overtake me. So yeah, I just want this to be another option to programs like AA, but it is, there's a lot more I could say there, because I just interact with so many people who've come out of AA because it wasn't helpful for them. But again, like, it works for some, like, let's keep it, but let's, not pretend like it's the only option out there.
That was the question. You just mentioned it briefly. The question I had, someone who's been in AA and they've been sober for many years, but the craving is still there. Would this Sinclair method work for someone like that? They could start taking the medication. Would their mind change if they were on this, even though they weren't necessarily drinking? They still had that feeling that they wanted to drink. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. There is some research to show that this medication taken with abstinence, taken every day, can help with cravings. And anecdotally, I've met a number of people over the years who told me that they're on it with abstinence and it helps with their cravings. And so it's definitely possible. On the other side, I've heard people say they took it and it didn't really help with cravings. So I think, if someone's in that place today, like, certainly there's no harm in getting a prescription. It's very cheap, and just trying it out to see if it does help with the cravings, because it does help people, and there is research to show that. Yeah.
the question I have is, go ahead, Scott. I have a question for later.
Okay, this is kind of a tough question.
Oh,
Thinking
good.
of neurochemistry, the body's response to opioids, and what you're reporting about how this medication kind of breaks the link. I understand that it's been used not only in AUD but OUD, so
Mhm.
opiate use disorder. What happens to a naltrexone user who has a serious injury, accident, and needs to be prescribed an opiate to deal with a legitimate pain management issue? How effective then is the opiate for the person who's been under naltrexone therapy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like talking about more like planned things, like if someone has a surgery coming up or something, uh, typically people will work with their doctor and they'll take them off naltrexone for like a week or whatever the doctor's recommendation is, just so they don't have it in their system so that they can take the opiate medication. But like you said, for like the more like, accidents or things that might happen, and then someone just took naltrexone last night or even that day, that is something that they will need to share with the medical team because the opiate, it won't work. It'll block the effects of it. And so in that case, they would need to use another pain medication. Some people, they even make, I think you can get them on Amazon, like bracelets or keychains or necklaces you can wear that say you're on naltrexone. I've known people to do that when they're taking the medication pretty frequently. But it would block the effects of a pain medication if someone has been taking naltrexone. So they either, would want to tell the physician, or some people, like I said, wear those medical bracelets or something like that, just to let them know, because it would block that. And then, if someone is on opiate medication, or if they're dependent on it and they take naltrexone, it would send them into a withdrawal. So that's definitely something, like we get those questions of if I'm on opiates, can I use this method? And typically, they would have to, of course, they'd have to be off the opiates in order to use it. But there are other medications that are, there's becoming to be a little bit more research of other medications that are showing promise, both on label and off label, for alcohol use disorder. The challenge with those is that there's not as much research, and it's hard enough to get an naltrexone prescription, which has been FDA approved, that these other ones,
Right.
they exist and there's research behind them. I know a couple doctors in a couple states that use them, but it's like to really reach people with them, that's a current challenge. They're just not as easily accessible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With this Sinclair method, it sounds like an individual can start it, of course, with the prescription, but also two questions with that. First of all, I think it's still a decision on the side of an individual that I need to do something about that AUD, right? Or alcoholism, or drinking too many bottles a week. It hits the budget as well. It ruins relationships. So at one point, it still needed a decision, right? It's kind of like suddenly an eye-opening, because why in the world would I start looking for, like, what is the Sinclair method? So does it require this individual eye-opening or decision-making?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does require someone to be motivated enough to want to do this, because obviously, one of the biggest criticisms I get is that, like, why would they take the pill then if it's not giving them the same euphoria? Which is true. Some people do think they're ready to start this method, but then they find that they're skipping the doses, or, not taking it super seriously. So someone does have to be motivated enough to take this
Okay.
pill beforehand.
So that was my question. Motivation is important, right? Individual. Another question related to that is, again, we talk about an individual decision, eye-opening, and then prescription. So it's an action that is required. You go to the doctor. You cannot just buy this medicine from the shelf. Also, probably a good idea to consult with the doctor that will I have any side effects? What do I expect? So I think it's a good approach to have a teamwork. And again, you are face to face with this medicine every day and a bottle of alcohol. So is a person who is a coach helpful? So is it any way to get a coach who practices Sinclair method?
Yeah, In a lot of studies, it's actually recommended that this medication be combined with a behavioral support program. And even in Australia, they require that to get a prescription. You have to be enrolled in some type of program.
Oh,
So
that's good.
it is, that's not required in the US, but I just find like, I've been a coach for the past 4 years now, guiding people through this. And I do find that it helps people reach their goals faster. It helps them, navigate this process with less uncertainty, because there's a lot of nuances to it. Like, yes, you're taking a pill before you drink. That's pretty simple, but there's a lot of nuances to it, like, how the medication is working and when to not take the medication, and strategizing alcohol-free days and changing habits and developing new coping tools, and all of these things that kind of go along with changing our relationship with alcohol, that are a long-term thing. Really, you want to be focusing on it over 6 to 9 months. And so having a coach or a support system is I find really beneficial. I've heard from people too who they just got prescribed the naltrexone and didn't really know anyone, and were kind of just like going about it on their own and didn't really know what to expect, so they stopped doing it after a month or two, just because they didn't have any frame of reference or support with it. So I do think that someone, if they're interested in this, like, getting the medication is the first step, but just also plug into some type of support structure, whatever that means to you, just so that you have someone there to answer those questions and really guide you through the ups and downs of it as well, because it's not just an overnight fix. It does take time.
Thank you. And that really explains what we have here on the screen, that why it is not 100% success, right? But it also talks about highly motivated people. So it seems like, thank you for your answer, because that explains that it should be a decision on the side of a person, a woman or man, but also you have to be motivated. And then it's better to have some support, people who went through that and people who are trained.
Yep.
Katie, you mentioned finding alternative coping mechanisms. One of the things that I think we established up front was that a fair number of people rely upon alcohol to cope with life, to kind of self-medicate when stress gets high. And it's wonderful that the Sinclair method will break the link and break that addictive process, but we still go back to what coping mechanism is now going to take the place of my favorite substance, my substance of choice, right?
Yeah.
That seems like that really would require or could be well aided by the presence of a coach.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I would say that's like the biggest challenge people have, is the habit and coping piece. They say, I know I don't really desire alcohol anymore, but I still notice I'm pouring my wine every night. Like, why is that? And so that is where like a coach can be really specific of helping someone set goals, or just think about things differently, or provide guidance of, what do other coping tools look like? And, with the way the medication works, without getting too nerdy about it, but when you're having alcohol-free days and you don't have the medication in your system on those days, because your receptors were blocked, now they're unblocked. And what happens is they essentially become extra sensitive for a 24 to 48 hour period. So then if someone is really strategic on those days and they go out and ride a bike or have ice cream or hang out with friends and people they love, then their brain is going to be getting an almost like a extra reinforcement of these other activities that are pleasurable. And so that's something in our program we like really guide people through, is like how to be strategic with those alcohol-free days, so we can teach our brain these other activities and things that are giving us pleasure. Meanwhile, when we're drinking, we're not getting that from alcohol. So over time, the scales start to tip and people start to say, like, I could drink today, but actually sorry, my phone is ringing. I really would rather go hang out with my friend or go out for ice cream or something like that. So yeah, but that is, I think, one of the most common challenges people have, because alcohol is like a big comfort blanket for a lot of us. And to let that go, what I love about this method is it can be done gradually. It's not like you're ripping off the Band-Aid. It's like you're gradually letting go of alcohol and gradually adding in other things as well.
It's amazing if it works like this, and people find a way to hear and see you today, and hear your personal experience, but also hear that it is based on a certain FDA approved medication, and also how to do that with the help of coaches and also with a strong support system. And still, I think because of the time that it takes between you start and between you truly start feeling like, oh, I can sense the difference in my brain. I don't reach out to alcohol because I'm stressed out or because I'm looking for pleasure, but yeah, I can control it. So I think it's in a way regaining control over our brains. Am I right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And people begin to feel empowered over alcohol, which is kind of a different belief system than AA, where we're powerless, which in
Yeah.
some sense we're using this method because we lost control over alcohol. But what happens over time is you gain your control back and alcohol gets taken off its pedestal and put in a rightful place where you're like, yeah, I could drink that, but maybe I'll wait till next week or something. It's just, no longer has that power over you anymore, which is just so freeing, to be honest.
How about this belief? And I see you, Scott, so I
Yeah,
will put
please.
you on the screen. So, how about this belief that cardiologists, for example, and now this with the theory of how to prolong your life, longevity, and so the doctors, scientists recommend for even a different approach with gender related. So, for men, it could be 2 glasses of red wine every day, and a glass of wine, red wine, they recommend for women. And so then, for example, if people overdid, though they try to do it for extending their longevity and their youthfulness, and so suddenly they get on this medicine, and then what I hear, you won't completely stop drinking. It's not abstinence, so you can still have it for your pleasure and maybe even for prolonging your life, right? So that's, I think, is an attraction is this in this approach or of this approach. But still, what if you stop drinking it completely? And the cardiologists say that if you used alcohol, don't stop suddenly using it because it's not good for the vessels, so your system adjusted. But of course, they say if you never drank, don't start drinking for your longevity purpose. So could you say a little about that? So
Yeah,
where is that?
it's interesting because like there was a meta-analysis that came out a couple years ago that basically concluded that no amount of alcohol is safe. And so there's a lot of contradicting information out there. And I think there are health benefits that come from alcohol, but I remember reading an article where they said, well, if you ate a bowl of grapes, you'd get the same kind of health benefits. So if someone gets to a place, like you said, the great thing about this method is moderation is possible. A lot of people go on this method with that goal in mind to have a champagne at a wedding or wine with dinner. It becomes possible with this method. Even when someone has alcohol use disorder, they can get to a place where they have that control. So that's one of the most appealing things about this method, because I find most people, even when they're struggling, they can't conceive of letting go of alcohol forever. They just want to have that control back over it. So this method does give people that option, but then others like myself end up going alcohol free just because we can't really, be bothered to drink anymore. It's just like, I don't feel like drinking. I don't really care for it anymore. So that's another thing that does happen for people. And I think that, we don't need alcohol. And like you said, like if someone hasn't been drinking, they don't need to start for health reasons. But it's up to the individual to decide like the kind of relationship they want to have with it. So that's what I love about it.
Yeah, that's what I have on the screen. Kind of an average American drinks a lot. It's like more than a drink a day, because it's 9.5 drinks per week, which is more than one per day. But also, not every American drinks. So think about it. It's an average, but that makes some people drink maybe 20 drinks a week. Yeah. Okay. So I think Scott had a question, right?
I did. Katie, I've read about addiction transfer, where someone terminates or shuts down one addiction, but they find that their addictive personality just goes to something else to establish an addiction. How does the Sinclair method impact that potential dynamic?
Yeah, it can happen. Like, one thing I noticed, like I did, and I see people do is, if they're trying to have an alcohol-free day and maybe it's the first few times they're doing it, they're not super comfortable, maybe they'll reward themselves with sugar or food, and then there could be an addiction transfers to sugar potentially. But what I've found a lot with this method, again, because it's a gradual process of kind of gradually letting go of alcohol as that coping tool and then building up other coping tools that are more healthy and sustainable, is that it's less likely, from what I've seen, for people to have an addiction transfers, because it is a gradual process, as opposed to just like, okay, all of a sudden you're sober and now you've got to figure everything else out in life. So it does give us, like, I feel like it gave me a lot of grace that I could just, okay, I'm gonna drink today, but let me try taking a hot bath first and see if that relaxes me instead of wine. So it gives us this ability to really practice different coping tools. But it can happen for people. But I think it's less likely, from what I've seen in my personal experience in working with clients, because it can be just this gradual process of de-addicting from alcohol and then replacing it with different more sustainable coping tools. But I will say real quick, like, it is interesting because a lot of people who get that bariatric surgery, gastric bypass surgery, that's a concern with those people. And what ends up happening because of that surgery, their stomach changes and the way they absorb alcohol changes. And a lot of those people end up with alcohol use disorder because they no longer have food and it's this sudden change, and then they turn to alcohol. And I've actually helped a lot of people on the Sinclair method who've gotten to that place.
Oh, wow. I never heard of that.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. Thank you for sharing with us. And I know that our audience, people who struggle with obesity, which is also eating, is pleasuring our brain. And it's also built up over the years. It's not built in overnight, and similarly to AUD. So this is very important. Thank you. So lots of patients who turn off from alcohol, they turn into after the bariatric surgery to drinking. Never heard of that. Okay, so that's a warning. Go ahead, Candy.
I was wondering, it's the Sinclair system. I'm kind of wrapping my head around this now. And you've made it through that addictive period and you've just gradually quit drinking and you don't really feel a need for it. Is it then finished? They say, I've always heard once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Are you done, or do you keep that box of pills around? So if you need to go back, is there relapse in this method too, or how does that work, or how do you make it to the end and know you're finished, or is that even a thing?
No, I'm so glad you asked that, because that is a really important point. So if someone does continue to drink following this method, first of all, the end goal is typically extinction or pharmacological extinction, meaning your brain has been restored to the state it was in before you developed alcohol use disorder. So it's essentially reset. And at that point, people can, continue to drink following the protocol. They would take the medication beforehand, or they can get to a place like I did where they just don't drink because they have no interest for it anymore. Their brain's no longer wired to crave it. But if someone does want to continue to drink, they should take the medication beforehand every single time as a protection, because it can be relearned. The behavior can be relearned over time. It takes probably, many months, what I've seen for people. But for most people, the addiction can be relearned. But the relapse becomes like a different type experience because, like, my brain is healed. I haven't drank in 4 years. I'm not concerned that I'm going to turn around and drink tomorrow because I don't have any urge. It's kind of like I tell people, I've never smoked cigarettes. So I'm not worried that tomorrow I'm going to go out and all of a sudden be addicted to cigarettes. It's just like, there's no memory in my brain. And so it's something similar when we reach extinction with this. But yes, if we do continue to drink, we want to take the pill beforehand as a protection. I will say, over the years, I've known a handful of people who've been able to return to drinking without the medication when they reached extinction. But those people typically, they're only drinking with meals. They're never drinking to cope. They've really done a lot of the work to create a more balanced relationship with alcohol. But in most cases, like, if I were to ever drink again, I would just take the pill beforehand, because it's my protection, essentially protecting my brain to not relearn it.
That's very helpful. And now tell us, please, about this Thrive Alcohol Recovery community. Because this is, again, takes us back to, can I do it alone? And you say, no, it's better to have a support system. So is it kind of a support system that you talk about?
Yeah, it is. And so this is a program we launched really because I felt like there was a real need for it. This medication and treatment is very not very well known, in many parts of the world. And so being a coach, I've really worked a lot of people with a lot of people like one-on-one and in group settings. And what I found was that there was not really like a one-stop place where everyone could get everything they needed. So I was like constantly emailing them resources and sending them to different places across the internet. And so I really wanted to create a place that's one place where people can get all of the support and resources they need for naltrexone and the Sinclair method. And that includes, one-on-one coaching, group coaching. They can have unlimited messaging support with coaches. There's an amazing community feed of people who are just really from around the world sharing what's going on for them. We really encourage people to be honest and vulnerable, like recognizing that mistakes are part of this process. So they're really supporting one another in there. We have video courses that guide people through this whole process from, day one until the end. And a lot of other just resources and tools and events that are really there for people. So, some people join and they love the group support and, the courses, but maybe they don't want to participate in the community piece, or maybe vice versa with other people. And so it's really just one place where people have lifetime access to everything they'll need for this method. And we've been just getting amazing feedback from our members as well, which has been like, for me, that's like what it's all about. So this is definitely my passion project. And we also have, as founders, we're Christians. So we also have a private optional group for people who are Christians as well to have our faith on this journey. If someone's not a Christian, they won't see any of that, but that's there as well as a feature in the program.
So what I hear is this Thrive community. Is it designed by you? You created it? You did. So could you say a little about it? That's amazing.
Yeah, I just like when I first learned about this method in 2017, there was nothing really out there. I was scouring the internet. There was like a couple little articles on some little blogs, and there was just not much information out there. And so ever since in my first week of getting on this treatment, I knew it was going to work. And so I've just been on fire to really spread the word. And I immediately started a YouTube channel and started just documenting my journey through it. And now I, still have people on, and I'll do success stories and share videos regularly. And that just kind of naturally evolved into me coaching people, and then just really wanting to create a support system for people out there, because I just would hear over and over again, like, oh, my doctor prescribed this. Some people get it at rehab to be taken with abstinence. As well, but they'll just get it and they don't really know what to do with it, or they don't really know how it works, or they don't have realistic expectations. Like I commonly hear from people that, oh, I thought it would work in the first month, like I would be done drinking, but it takes longer than that. So I just wanted to create a place where people can really feel supported in a private online community where they can, plug in and get the resources and information they need at any time. There's an app, there's a website, and it's a private community specifically for the Sinclair method, because this method is very nuanced. There's a lot of just specifics with following the protocol and questions that come up. Like the protocol is simple, but it's not always easy, is what we typically tell people. So this is the place where people are going to get support from coaches like myself. And a lot of our coaches have gone through the Sinclair method themselves. And it's just become this like really awesome, compassionate, judgment-free community and place where people can plug into and connect with others who are going through it and who just get it. Because even, if our spouse doesn't understand addiction, like it's, they might be supportive, but they just don't understand what it's like. And so it's amazing to connect with people who have, been through it themselves as well.
Absolutely. And since you mentioned Christian communities, you know how important it is in practically 100 communities in the nation to have these support groups. And like in our church, we have a support group that we call coping support group. But when it comes to alcoholism, for example, I won't feel equipped to coach, because then especially in other methods like AA, we usually refer people to go to AA or Alone, or like now Sinclair method. But for example, if you coach and you say you have other coaches, do you train them? Does it require certain certification that maybe we can even refer some people from our community and from other communities in the nation to get on your website? And I saw that how well it is designed. And on the top, it even says that you can get insurance coverage for that. Correct?
We don't do insurance, but we do health savings and flex spending accounts.
Yes,
So
yes, not insurance. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, like a health savings. So you could use your money that you put aside for this program.
yes.
Could you say at least briefly how much does it cost, for example, to get coaching through your community?
Sure. Yeah. So our program cost, it comes with lifetime access, and people can either pay $9.97 or they can do 12 monthly payments of $97 a month. But that does come with lifetime access because, kind of like we talked about, what might happen for people is they think they're ready and they start on it and then they might fall off and not take the medication properly for a while and then restart it. Or, like I said, the average time for people to get where they want to go is a year. So we just want people to have access to everything for as long as they need it. And what we found also is that when people do reach extinction, a lot of people want to give back. They want to mentor others through it, like naturally. And I've heard over and over again, it was true for me also, that it's part of their recovery is to kind of like pay it forward and help others. So even when people have joined our program, that's actually a different YouTube channel. I was on an interview with that channel, but that's a great YouTube channel. That's not
Yeah.
ours though.
Okay.
That's not you.
Sorry.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, because I think in you, I will put it in a second. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm telling you about the program. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, so when people plug in, they can have access to the program as long as they need it. And then if when they do join, they get a free coaching call, so they automatically have a one-on-one coaching call as soon as they join. And then if they wanted more one-on-one, they can add that for an additional fee where they get packages of 3 coaching sessions for $397. But we also offer group coaching that's included every week. So right now we have 2 sessions per week that are, group support. And we also do other live events where we're doing Q&A sessions and just really supporting people in the community side. So like a lot of our members take advantage of the messaging support that they get with coaches, because sometimes they'll just have a random question that's quick and can be addressed through a chat. So they can message our coaches at any time there as well. But all of our coaches are trained for the Sinclair method. There's no like official certification program quite yet for the Sinclair method, because again, it's such a relatively unknown treatment. But there is a nonprofit that does offer a coaching certification program, and our coaches have gone through that, and we're also meeting with them regularly to mentor them. And we love when people have their personal experience with the method as well, just because that means so much to the other person going through that they've been through the method themselves. So yeah, I think that's a little bit more about the program and how it works and the costs and everything. And it's accessible through an app and our website as well. And so another thing about it too, I forgot to mention, is people, like a lot of people are concerned with privacy. And so when people create their account on there, they can have a pseudonym or just their first name or initials. And so we have that aspect in there as well, where it's going to be, as private as they want to be. Other people are, they give their real information, but it's up to the individual to decide what they want to share.
Yeah. So this is your correct YouTube account for people to get in. Is it correct?
The one in the chat, yeah, the Embody Daily, that's the correct one.
Yes.
So-
Okay.
So Lydia,
Okay.
it's actually the one I just dropped in, not this Fit Recovery, but Embody Daily.
Okay.
That was my old name, the Embody Daily, and YouTube wouldn't let me change it. I've been trying to change it to our new name, but it'll still link you there. If you type
Okay.
in the Sinclair method, you'll see my face because I have lots of videos on there.
Okay. Wonderful. So again, let's summarize it all. If you suffer from AUD and maybe you don't call it alcoholism, and it's fine, it is still a problem related to using too much alcohol. And I think it's also individual, because I don't think you should compare yourself with other individuals and you say, oh, John drinks like 5 times more than I do, and he's not an alcoholic. Well, don't measure it that way, because the point is, I think what I hear from you, Katie, is like, what does it do to your brain? How long you build that habit, and how do you use it? You use it for coping with different issues, or you use it for pleasuring yourself, and or maybe you're substituting for another addiction you had.
Yeah.
So, but the solution is still the same. So I advise everybody to get on your website. You have a Facebook, you have YouTube, and you have Instagram. So
Yep.
whatever you use, thank you so much for being with us today, Katie. It's an exciting lesson today, because we know so many people who come to us, and sometimes you feel helpless. You don't know what to do. But I learn myself, even when person comes to me and says, "Oh, I'm in a rehab," and I'm already internally thinking, "Well, good luck. It will take you at least 7 times before it hits you seriously that you need to stop drinking." So it's not about abstinence. Maybe for some people, again, not for everybody, right?
Yep.
But for it's not a substitution, but it's a just different approach, and the success rate, what I've learned, is much higher.
Yep. It's
Yes,
much
and from
higher.
your personal experience, I'm sure you have statistics. What do you see? What is your success rate?
It's the same as that, honestly. Like, the number one reason why people don't succeed is they're not taking the medication. So maybe they're not
Okay.
quite ready. But if someone's committed to that part of it, like within a matter of time, whether it's 6 months, a year and a half, they're going to get to where they want to go.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
And
astounding.
I like that you do not say, "Oh, it's a miracle pill," like you said in the beginning. It's not a miracle pill. It's not like you take it and you're healed and you're free, but it takes time. Like you just learned about it. I love your comparison with water,
Good.
because it does not matter how much we try to stay not drinking water. Then sooner or later, our brain says, "Hello, I'm dehydrated." So same thing with alcohol. Never put those two things together. So
Yep.
something that becomes essential, right? Thank you
Yep.
so much, Katie. Thank you, Candy. Thank you, Scott. We are excited maybe to have you again to hear about person's stories. And maybe in the end, you tell us a success story besides yourself that we can complete our podcast today.
Oh my gosh, yes. There are so many, honestly. I think one that's just come to mind is a woman who had 2 kids. She's a nurse. She was drinking 2 to 3 bottles of wine every night after work. I clearly remember her telling me that on her way to work some days she'd have to pull over and throw up because she would be so hungover, and she was just caught in this cycle. Had tried AA, been in and out, kind of committing to it and then relapsing, committing and relapsing. And when she got started on this method, she kind of had a false start where she wasn't really taking the medication correctly, again because she didn't have like support. She didn't really know what she was doing. She was just kind of experimenting with it. And then she came to me and our program, and what ended up happening is within 6 months she was drinking like once or twice a month. She had lost like I don't remember what it was now, but I think it was like 20 or 30 pounds. She had totally changed her routine. Like, she made a joke how she's like in bed by 8 o'clock because she's like has such a good morning routine now. She was going for a different job at a different hospital to get a promotion. And it was just amazing to see this transformation that for her, within 6 months, her life was completely different. She was completely different. And her relationship with alcohol was completely different. And it's just, that's the thing. When we can change our drinking habits, it can have such a positive ripple effect in a direction. And, if we're drinking too much, it can have that negative ripple effect. But so much can change in 6 months or a year for people when their brain finally gets free from this addiction. So that's just one. I could spend hours telling them to you. And in fact, on my YouTube, I have a lot of success stories. So if people were to head over there, they can see a lot of those there.
Oh, that's a great story. And I know that people look for those stories, especially spouses, when one spouse is suffering from this addiction and this disorder. So I think it's just for some people, it will be the answer to their problem. So thank you, Katie. Thank you, Candy. Henry Scott. We go live every Saturday at 5 p.m. Central Time, and we're looking forward to have your questions sent us to us. I'm Dr. Lydia, and thank you so much for watching us today. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.